Hello and welcome to Love is Not a List with me, Gillian McCallum. Come on a journey with me to meet the top in their field, to take an alternative look at all things life, relationships, dating, parenthood, love and fertility, with the lofty aspiration, changing your life for the better. Hello, and thank you for joining me this week. I am with an incredible expert, the person that you have been so rooting for to appear because she is the world-renowned Dr. Mary Wren. She is famous amongst every single person who ever really wanted to get pregnant or ever really wanted to have children or work out where they were with their fertility. All the big names know exactly who she is. And if you haven't heard of her, she is here today to introduce herself, talk a little bit about all of the expertise that she's built up over 3 decades. My understanding is, and she'll tell you a little bit more, that Dr. Mary Wren has brought into the world, not personally, individually, but aided men and women throughout the world to have over 20,000 children in her career. She's recently retired, which is why this is probably the first time she's ever had a chance to chat to someone like me, because she's always been far too busy helping people with their fertility, helping them get pregnant and helping them achieve their dream. Thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thank you, Gillian. It's lovely to see you again. The wonders of technology.
Absolutely right. And I'm thrilled that you're here because I want to ask you some of the really tough stuff, some of the brilliant questions. One of the things that's going around social media right now, one of the things that lots of women are talking about is the fact that the sperm swims to the egg. So therefore, you should make a man work for you rather than the other way around. Do you think that might be true?
I kind of think that probably in fertility, it's the same as in life. It has to be a kind of joint partnership. So I think, of course, the egg is moving from the ovary into the fallopian tube. So there is some transit at both ends.
Now, one of the things that I'm known for is slightly attaching something to my hat to represent what it is that we're doing. Of course, as we all know, podcasting is such a visual medium, which is why it's so important to do this. The thing that I had was an ostrich egg, and I did try to kind of add it on here, and it didn't quite work. So I might just kind of have to hold it a little bit. And I think also, is it true that the egg is the largest cell in the human body and a sperm is the smallest? Had you heard that? Is that something that people talk about?
I'd need to actually check that, but the egg is substantially larger than the sperm. Yes, absolutely. And I can't think of any cells bigger than the egg, but I wouldn't want to, place a very large bet on that.
So one of the things, you know, that I'm 45 now, and I had my first and only darling child a little bit later in life. And there seems to be a sense of a feeling that you can have a child at any time, that now our fertility window is wide open. Certainly we know that Al Pacino and other famous guys have had children very late on. Naomi Campbell very famously recently had her second child and said that you can be a mother at any age. Is that true, or is being a parent at any age more to do with how wealthy you are? I get the feeling there might be a financial divide in here as well as a fertility divide. What do you think to that?
I think that we all know that women go through the menopause and that you're not going to have a baby after the menopause unless you have either frozen eggs, frozen embryos, or decided to use donor eggs. So it's extremely unlikely that anyone is going to have a woman is going to have a baby very late in life unless she has involved fertility treatment. So spontaneous conception isn't going to occur at a much later age. So of course, because fertility treatment is not, particularly in older women funded on the NHS in the UK, there is obviously going to have to be a financial outlay in order to become a child at a later age. It raises the question. It's less likely that uterine factors are significantly affected by aging, but there might be some impact on that, and whether or not that might reduce the implantation rates. But it's primarily about the age of the egg. So if you've got a 58-year-old uterus, but a 32-year-old egg, then the chances of conception should be similar to a 32-year-old uterus with a 32-year-old egg. But that has to involve technology.
So just thinking this through, if you were an older woman who's gone through the menopause, you could still carry a baby, providing the egg and potentially sperm are significantly younger? Is that, there's no limit to how late you could carry a child yourself?
I mean, older fathers can still produce sperm that can make a child. We all know that because of the numerous examples of older fathers. But it's more to do with the age of the egg. Obviously, if a woman has gone through the menopause, she's no longer menstruating, and therefore you would need to prepare the uterus using hormone replacement therapy to create an environment that would be appropriate for an implanting embryo. But that is relatively easy. You can do that in women who've gone through a premature menopause. You can do that if you're doing frozen embryo replacement cycles, where you are creating an environment with hormone replacement rather than using the natural cycle. But the rate determining step is obviously going to be the viability of the egg.
And so from what you've said, the viability of the egg is the key factor. We know that men can produce sperm ongoing, but I think some of the research seems to suggest it gets more and more damaged over time. Is that correct? And the egg repairs the sperm. Is that correct? To some degree?
I mean, certainly the egg does have some ability to repair DNA damage in the sperm, and the aging in the man must have some impact. There's suggestion that that there are definitely factors that autism may be linked to possibly older fathers, but the egg is definitely, and the age of the egg, that the health of the egg is going to be an incredibly important part in all of this. We know that the rate of miscarriage increases with the age of the egg. We know that the incidence of genetic problems, such as Down syndrome, increase with maternal age. Obviously, with screening of embryos, it's possible to identify those embryos with genetic abnormalities that would cause a miscarriage or would lead to the birth of a child with a problem such as Down syndrome. So, if possible, you're going to have a greater chance of a successful pregnancy with youthful eggs.
And when we're talking about, on the more youthful side of eggs, I know the statistic or the age that people have said for a very long time is you need to get pregnant before the age of 35. But there was some research out that seemed to suggest, well, 41 is more realistic in terms of how we live now and the health that we have now. From your experience over all of these decades, what's your experience with regards to age and maternal age?
I think bottom line is that a lot of this comes down to luck. You can be extremely lucky and get pregnant very easily in your early 40s, and you can be in your early 30s and have huge difficulties getting pregnant because of recurrent miscarriages, because of maybe that you're with a man who's got poor quality sperm. So it isn't straightforward. And that's the difficulty, that if you are the extremely lucky woman who did get pregnant without any difficulty, later in life, you're probably quite surprised that people go on and on about how difficult it is. But I think if you're looking populations, you will see more pregnancies, fewer miscarriages, a lower incidence of problems such as Down syndrome in a younger population.
And of course, it's kind of, I don't want to say trendy, maybe that is the right word, maybe not, to go for egg freezing. Freeze your eggs is something that I was certainly told to do a lot, kind of casually over dinner or over drinks. Oh, freeze your eggs. As though it was, like going to get your hair cut, or, just kind of a routine, everyday thing that we should be doing. Is it a routine thing that women should be doing? And I'm not saying it shouldn't be. Is it something that we should be taking charge of our fertility in that way and saying, I haven't found the right partner, or the timing hasn't been right, whatever the set of circumstances is, should more women be freezing them? Or is it false hope? Is it false hope for the future?
I think the huge problem, obviously, seems to be that generally, perhaps in developed countries, women are educated, women have careers, and for many complicated social reasons, a lot of women are delaying having a family because maybe they haven't met the right person. Who knows? But egg freezing isn't going to be the solution for everyone, but it potentially offers some women the opportunity to have a child later in life if they haven't met somebody that they want to have a child with at the right time. Are women fussier? Are men more immature, less likely to want to settle and have children? I don't know. I mean, I don't have all the answers. As with IVF, not all eggs collected in an IVF cycle will lead to a pregnancy, but some of them will. And the same, obviously, is going to be the true with frozen eggs. So are you going to regret not doing it, or are you going to be disappointed that you did it and it didn't lead to a successful pregnancy? And herein lies the kind of difficult question that women have to face. And I think talking to women who have considered egg freezing, who have done it, what are their options? Do nothing. Create embryos with donor sperm, either to use them at the time, or to freeze embryos created with donor sperm, which then might create the difficulty, would they use those embryos with a different man? And obviously, if you're using donor sperm as a single woman, you're embarking on the challenge of being a single parent, which obviously there are going to be women that will embrace that decision, because perhaps parenting is has often been a female dominated role. And if you don't freeze your eggs and you do meet somebody at 45, your chances of getting pregnant through sex are going to be minimal. Your chances of getting pregnant through IVF with your own eggs are minimal. And you might have had an opportunity if you'd met somebody wonderful at 45 with eggs that you'd frozen at 30 if you'd done it. Might not a guarantee, but it might have been an option. So I suppose women are trying to weigh up, can I afford to do this now financially, versus will I emotionally regret not doing it? And I think you have to be very clear that none of this is a guarantee of what's going to happen in the future, but it's an opportunity.
And is there a difference if a woman is considering freezing her eggs? Is there a difference between the thawing the transplant, the process of a frozen egg versus a frozen embryo? Does one increase your chances of a live birth at a later stage?
There is a slightly higher risk of cryo damage from an egg than from an embryo. Obviously, the embryo has a lot more cells, particularly if you're freezing the embryo at the blastocyst stage. Again, with the current technology, you know once you've inseminated the egg whether or not the egg is going to fertilize. You know, if you've decided to allow the embryo to develop, which embryos stop developing in the lab. And obviously, if you've made the decision to genetically test the embryos before you freeze them, you then have the information about whether or not the embryos you're going to keep have the right genetic information to give you a better chance of having a viable pregnancy. So the potential advantages of freezing an embryo is that you know how many better embryos you've got. And therefore, if you end up with just one genetically normal embryo and you don't think that that is a good enough chance, you could decide to go through the process. Whereas if you're freezing eggs, you don't know if you've frozen enough. Now, it's still possible that you can freeze an embryo that will fail to recover, but you've gone further down the path and you've excluded from the initial batch of eggs those that were not going to fertilize, not going to grow, have the wrong genetics. So it's placing a bet on the ground much further around the course.
Can you just repeat that sentence just again, because I just missed it?
So it's a little bit like placing your bet on the Grand National when you've maybe got 2 or 3 hurdles to go rather than at the beginning. So if you imagine that you've got this enormous set of hurdles to get through, by freezing eggs, they're at the start of that difficult process. So the start of the Grand National. Whereas if you've frozen embryos that have been genetically tested, they're not absolutely guaranteed to make you pregnant, but you're many more hurdles over the course.
And I know it's probably hard for you to make a recommendation, but from what you've said simply there, if I was to pick, I'd be saying freezing embryos, which would get me further along the line, would be better. But again, that would take into account my position. And as you said earlier, imagine if you use donor sperm, but you then meet a partner later. How will that partner feel about donor sperm? Well, they say, yeah, that's not a problem. Let's do that. Or they say, no. I'm not interested in that. It would have to be my own sperm. Why didn't you just freeze eggs? So then does it put women in a position where they're thinking, well, do I have to freeze eggs and embryos? And how many hormones are going into my body? And how much time does this take? And how much expense does this take? It really puts women into a quandary. And I think, when I was flippantly saying earlier that it's like going to the hairdresser and getting a haircut, that's only for the person suggesting it, not for the person that actually has to go through it. So I think people very casually throw this out for women to do, not realizing how much of a complex and nuanced thing it is to decide, I want to take charge of my fertility. I know I want to take control of it. I haven't met the right partner or whatever else has happened in my life. So what do? Do I pick the donor? Do I freeze the egg? Do I hope someone will come along later? And then the next part, and then the next part, which is, when do I go for it? When is the time that I'm going to, and my mum used to always say to me when I was younger, oh, there's never a good time to have a child. And that's possibly true. I certainly was pretty heavily pregnant during COVID, and COVID didn't exist when I got pregnant. And then suddenly, we're bang in the middle of COVID, and it felt like the worst time on the planet to be having a child. So I imagine lots of people feel that way. But do you think that puts women off delays a little bit further the idea of maybe waiting for the right partner or maybe waiting for the right time?
Oh, I'm sure that people are going to delay these decisions. You know, it's obviously fantastic for those people who are lucky enough to have met the right person at a young age and they're both on the same page and they both want to have children and they get on with it. Perfect. But, you know, that situation doesn't exist for everybody. I think if somebody is sure that they want to have a child come what may, then having a child with a sperm donor is the right thing to do, and to get on with it as soon as it's, you know, possible, emotionally and financially. I think now we would, given that the success rate with egg freezing is pretty good. Again, if you're freezing 28-year-old eggs, they're going to give you a better success rate when you come to use them than if you're freezing 38-year-old eggs. That by not fertilizing the eggs when you're a single woman with donor sperm gives you the option of doing that in the future if you've still not met somebody, or obviously using them with a partner if you're lucky enough to meet that partner. So I think if a woman is fairly sure at that point in her life that she wouldn't want to have a child on her own, and I think that's the kind of difficult thing that women have to think about. Would I have a child on my own if that was the only option available to me? And that's the difficult question that men never have to ask themselves, that, you know, they can be 40, 50 or 60 and still potentially have a child, provided they've got a partner who's young enough or who froze their eggs at a young enough age.
And that was the question I was going to go on to next, which is, we've talked quite a bit about female fertility there. So what about male fertility? You mentioned earlier perhaps a higher risk of genetic disorders, potentially a link to autism. We know that plenty of older fathers exist, certainly amongst the celebrities. Should men consider freezing their sperm for reasons other than having cancer or having treatment that means that they won't be producing sperm anymore? Is it something that men do? Should they be doing it?
No, I don't think there's ever been any suggestion that freezing your sperm, because again, there's going to be a loss of some sperm through the freezing thawing process. But given that most men have millions and millions of sperm anyway in a single ejaculate, I can't see that there's any benefit to freezing sperm to extend your fertility window when it's still incredibly successful for men, provided they've got a young enough partner. And there are still huge numbers of older fathers who've got healthy children.
So it shouldn't put men off if they're slightly older, and it shouldn't put women off having an older partner?
No, I mean, I think obviously it raises the social question of, is it fair to the child to have a father that probably won't even see them finish primary school? But because it's possible, and because it's possible through sex, provided an older man is having sex with a much younger woman, nobody ever talks about it. But I think from a social perspective, you know, it's nice for children to have at least, you know, healthy parents to see them to the next stage of their own life. Ideally, you know, for children to have parents that will be fit enough and well enough to be grandparents, if possible.
And that kind of ethical dilemma, is that one that you faced during your career? You don't have to answer these questions if you don't feel comfortable answering, but is that one that you would have faced if you'd had clients coming to you where you felt, you know, this person is so old?
I don't think my job was to give people a realistic information about the chances of success. I don't think it was my job ever to make a moral decision about whether or not somebody was too old.
Okay. Yeah.
I think, you have to talk to people about the chances of their treatment being successful, and the processes that the parents have to go through, the risk of miscarriage, etc., etc. Whether or not you're taking risks by putting back multiple embryos, the risks of multiple pregnancies, particularly perhaps in an older woman if she's using donated eggs. But I think to actually make a moral judgment about whether or not somebody was too old to be a parent isn't. I think it's a decision that society has to talk about, but I'm not sure how we deal with that. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and I think you can see that that's true. And we don't live in communities. I mean, I was lucky enough to have grandmothers that both had a big input in helping my parents raise us. And that's, I think, of great benefit.
And it's I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a great benefit, not just for the child, but also for the parent or the parents. And
it's a huge joy for the grandparents. But I think the later in life we have children, the less likely there will be grandparents there. Yeah. But I think people can bring up children on their own without that help. But I think there are massive advantages to having an extended family if you're having your own child.
Yes.
Whether that's a biological family or a family of friends, I think it can work. I think you can bring up a child with, if you have an extended support network of friends.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult and lonely job on your own, I think, entirely on your own.
And that's absolutely correct. And, I've been so incredibly lucky. I've got two brilliant parents who have been so supportive of me and my daughter. And I also have a great network now where I am. But, there's so many women out there who are doing it on their own. There are obviously, of course, fathers out there who are doing it on their own, who don't have the network of relatives. And before you have a child, I certainly didn't realize that it really is 24 hours a day. You kind of have this idea of this child. Yes, I'll have this child. It'll be great. I'll have this child. But you don't realize that, certainly for a very long period, first of all, you can't even put them down. I mean, my daughter refused to be put down. So, until she could crawl, she had to be held, carried, touched. She was just a very cuddly kind of touchy feeling. So this is 24 hours a day. You're taking your child into the bath with you, you're to the toilet with you, there's no period where this your lovely wonderful child is placed down. And I think you just can't comprehend that every hour of your day has to be accounted for. Who is caring for that child? If I'm working, if I've got phone calls, if I've got to be in an office, where will that child be? And you don't necessarily always want your child to be in 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. daycare. Some people do choose that, but you don't necessarily always want that. So you've got to factor in, well, when am I going to be there? When are my parents going to be there? When can a friend be there? And so you end up kind of building a mosaic of care around the 7 days that you have every week. And maybe I'm alone in that, but I could not have comprehended that for a second before my child popped out.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that it is difficult if you have a child that won't settle, that won't go in a cot, that has to be held and carried all the time. And I think it's quite tough. to leave your child to cry. I think having an experienced mother, my mother was a pediatrician, so, you know, she was an enormous help in telling me, you know, you don't have to hold the child 24 hours a day. You can put them down and they can cry and they will be fine. But you feel incredibly anxious because so many people have so little contact with babies until they have their own first child. You know, I think historically, when you grew up in a large extended family, you had younger cousins, you had younger siblings. A lot of people, I mean, I'd certainly held babies as a young girl because I had younger cousins. We saw a lot of our cousins. But I think it's scary for a lot of women. The first baby they ever hold is their own. And you don't really know what to do until trial and error. It's hard, isn't it?
It's insanely tough, and you definitely don't know what to do, and it's a huge learning curve, but it's one that I definitely don't regret, and my daughter was hugely longed for, and I feel the same feelings that a lot of women feel in the years leading up to that, which was a life where I knew I couldn't live my life without a child. And I you know, I'm also learning through, you know, obviously the work that I do, that men feel the same way too. And what I've learned through the various jobs and companies that I have, that women tend, if women are going to want to have children, if that's what they want to do, they're going to really start feeling it in their kind of early to mid 30s. And that's just my experience. But what I also found is that men also get that same sense. If a man wants a child, it really starts kicking in, but it doesn't start kicking in for another 10 to 15 years. So the problem then is there's this pool of men who, right, come on, I've got to have this kid. I'm ready to go. This is the time. And of course, there's an age imbalance between when men really want to make it happen and when women really want to make it happen. And so if you're not in an age gap relationship, it can cause some problems. And if those men are single at that point in time, they're looking for a partner who's potentially much younger or looking for a surrogate. And I'm sure you must have experienced this in your, was surrogacy something that you helped or aided with in your career, or is that a different area?
A little bit, yes. I was involved in assisting couples that needed surrogacy. And I think obviously it will become more commonplace, not just for helping women who've got uterine problems, but for assisting men to have children through surrogacy and egg donation. It is difficult, isn't it? I wonder if the 2 world wars made men very aware of their mortality, and that where the men coming out of these world wars then keen to have children as soon as possible. And have we now got a generation of men who don't have that pressure? They haven't faced their own mortality. I don't know. It's very difficult, but I think that certainly I see that men don't seem to grow up emotionally as quickly as women. So maybe it's the emotional maturity that makes women realize that they want to have children now, and that men come to that decision much later.
That's fascinating. And I never thought of it from the perspective of previous generations having this kind of pressure, or perceiving there to be a pressure, because they realize life is short, things can happen, I've got to get on with it now. And I think you're right in saying that society now, because men know that they're going to live till they're 100, or if you're in Silicon Valley, till you're 500, there isn't that need to get ahead and have children. And one of the myths, I always think it's a myth about women and fertility, is that certainly if you read in the media, they always say, oh, it's women putting their careers first and saying, oh, I'll do it later. And when I speak to women, and I know that you've spoken to thousands, if not tens, hundreds of thousands of women in your career. In my experience, it tends to be, I haven't met a person who was ready to have children. I was ready, and I haven't met someone who was equally as ready as me. And I don't think it's a position of being overly fussy or overly critical, although there is a small portion of women that will be. I think it really is about trying to find a partner. And again, we're talking about heterosexual relationships here. A lot of what we're doing is talking about heterosexual relationships. We're trying to find a male partner. And I think, as you say, emotional maturity is potentially a factor in that, and maybe just a feeling of there's not a pressure. It can come later. But I do think there is kind of a biological kick in about 10 to 15 years later. That's what I've been seeing anyway.
I think it's complex, isn't it? I think that I agree with you. I don't think that women delay having children because of their careers. I think it is sometimes difficult to have a career and to have a child at the same time. And I know that a lot of women fear that they will be passed over if they take time out to have children until they've reached a certain position where they feel more secure, which obviously, you can become a father and still get promoted, which is really difficult. I also think that childcare is expensive, difficult. People work long hours, so how on earth do you factor in childcare if you've got to, getting to work early and staying at work late? It's all really difficult. Don't know what the solution is. I think, and I feel incredibly, I think it's a real challenge for women, particularly for women. And one that I think some men, but not all men, can see and appreciate. So, as you said, people flippantly saying, "Oh, just go and freeze your eggs," is kind of missing the point. Big companies that were offering women the opportunity to freeze their eggs should have also been offering women good childcare. I mean, how many big companies have fantastic creches that will make it possible for a woman to have a job and to have good childcare included in the workplace?
You have hit the nail on the head. I believe that big companies offering egg freezing is the biggest corporate con of my generation. Women out there are being told about this incredible benefit of egg freezing. And I believe this is in the corporate world. We're not talking about doing it for other reasons. They're being told, we're doing this to support you. We're doing this to support our females. I believe they're doing it because they want to push off the time that women get pregnant so that they can keep them for longer, so they don't have to deal with pregnancy complications. They don't have to deal with maternity leave. They don't have to worry about will they come back part-time or full-time or any of these horrendous things that large corporations think about. I think it's just designed to make women think they've got a safety net from their brilliant company, but the corporation's doing it so that their female staff won't get pregnant.
I kind of agree with you, but I kind of think if they did it if it was a package that they had really good childcare and egg freezing, I'd say fantastic. You're offering the opportunity for women who are single to freeze eggs, not for kind of our benefit, but for your benefit. But we're also providing good childcare for those women who've chosen to have children so that they can come back to work. And childcare has become so ridiculously expensive. I mean, when I hear about, through friends who've got children who are having children, and they're telling me that the childcare is effectively going to wipe out an awful lot of women's salaries. If you're a teacher, if you're a nurse, that what you're going to pay for full-time childcare is going to equate to what you would have, earned from your job, which is ridiculous.
So let's put it out there to all of those big companies who are offering egg freezing. The world's foremost expert in fertility, Dr. Wren, says to you, if you really want to support your staff with children, give them high quality childcare, high quality creches to enable them to come to work, do a good job, but know that their child is taken care of. So you've heard it here from Dr. Wren. We're putting it out there to all of those big corporations. This is what we expect you to do, not just freezing these, actually taking care of what pops out at the end of it. Right. Yes. I've got a couple of true or false because we're almost near the end. And I have my friend Brenda, who knows or knew that I was going to be chatting to you today. And I only have 3 true or false for you. So, true or false? Putting a positive pregnancy test under your pillow can summon the stork fairy.
False.
Darn it. Repeatedly dancing the Macarena during your fertile period can increase your chances of conception.
I've never heard that, but I am sure that people who are happy and relaxed are maybe having more sex. So maybe dancing makes you happy and relaxed,
Perfect. And finally, Brenda always likes to include a question that has the word socks in it. So true or false? Wearing lucky fertility socks with pictures of cute babies on also enhances your chances of getting pregnant.
I think that an awful lot of people, particularly those going through IVF, have talismans, lucky eyes. And I just think that if you feel the need to have a talisman, use it. I just don't think anything like that hurts, does it?
Absolutely not. I love it. It's brilliant. Get a talisman, grab a hold of it, have faith in it, have belief in it. Get Dr. Wren out of retirement because we need her to keep giving us babies.
But I think everybody needs to feel positive. So I think if you've got a lucky anything, it might not work, but it doesn't hurt, does it?
Definitely not. And finally, do you have a piece of random life advice or any other type of advice that you'd like to share with people listening?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to try and think of something that my mother would have said, because my mother was extremely wise. I remember her telling me that you get the children that you deserve if you're lucky enough to have children. But I think probably my piece of life advice is to be kind to yourself. I think sometimes we are too hard on ourselves. We feel that we set the bar high, we kind of set ourselves up to fail. So I think be kind to yourself.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me again. We met several years ago and I was lucky enough to spend some quality time with you then, and you are such a gem, and I know why everyone loves you so much, because I love you too. And thank you very much for spending this time with me, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, Gillian, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us at Love Is Not a List to find out more about the brilliant guests that I interview, and to get some groundbreaking advice on dating, matchmaking, sex, relationships, and elective co-parenting. Visit us on the links below.